Did you know that The Mask in 1994 starring Jim Carrey became an instant cult classic? In The Mask, Carrey's over-the-top performance, razor-sharp wit, and that unbridled, cartoonish charm created an unforgettable character who made you believe that a magic mask could turn an ordinary guy into a living cartoon. Fast forward to Son of the Mask. Here, instead of recapturing that spark, the filmmakers introduced a bizarre premise involving a whole new cast, a disturbing concept about a man impregnating his wife while wearing Loki's magic mask, and a child with cartoony superpowers. And let's not even start on the wacky sperm sequence that forced visual effects artists to work overtime. So, before we jump into this Son of the Mask train wreck, a real quick ask that if you're new to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, please take a second to hit that subscribe button now. It's one small click for you, but a huge deal for us. Thanks. Reason number 1. Misguided premise. One of the most fundamental issues with Son of the Mask is its premise, a concept so bizarre and disturbing that it immediately sets the wrong tone. While the original The Mask was all about unleashing your inner cartoon, transforming everyday life into a surreal, laugh-filled escapade, this sequel takes that idea to a dark, almost grotesque extreme. Rather than a lighthearted exploration of a man's secret wish to live out his wildest fantasies, the film bases its entire story on an unsettling scenario. A man engages in reckless behavior with a magic mask, resulting in a child who inherits cartoon superpowers. The original film suggested that the mask could liberate you from societal constraints, allowing you to be your most animated self. But here, the mask becomes a vehicle for a disturbing narrative that never quite finds the balance between comedy and horror. Rather than channeling the playful irreverence of Carrey's Stanley Ipkiss, the film comes off as exploitative and off-putting. It seems as though the creators were so eager to cash in on the brand that they didn't even stop to ask, does anyone really want to see a story about a man whose misadventures with a magical mask lead to something as grotesque as a super baby? Reason number 2. Uninspiring CGI. If there's one thing that The Mask did right, it was the seamless blend of practical effects and innovative digital wizardry that transformed an ordinary man into an outlandish cartoon hero. In stark contrast, Son of the Mask bombards the screen with uninspired, cheap CGI that not only fails to dazzle but actively detracts from the film's potential. One of the most notorious sequences is the wacky sperm montage, a moment that was supposed to be humorous but instead became an exercise in visual crudeness. The digital effects are so poorly executed that they land squarely in the uncanny valley, making the intended absurdity feel more grotesque than funny. Instead of the crisp, eye-popping visuals that could have given the film a unique edge, we are left with a barrage of over-processed images that remind us how little consideration was put into the special effects department. Moreover, the film's overall art direction is marred by a lack of cohesion. The CGI creatures and effects are jarringly out of sync with the live-action footage, creating a disjointed viewing experience that pulls you out of the moment. The film tries to modernize the concept by using digital effects to create a hyper-real version of a cartoon world, but the execution is clumsy, and some viewers describe it as disturbing instead of comedic. Reason number 3. The sequel isn't funny. At the heart of The Mask is its humor, a wild, anarchic blend of physical comedy, sharp wit, and that unmistakable Jim Carrey charisma that made every moment unpredictable and hilarious. Unfortunately, Son of the Mask misses that comedic mark entirely. Instead of delivering the uproarious, free-spirited laughter that made the original an instant classic, the sequel comes off as flat, forced, and even downright depressing. One major issue is that the film tries too hard to be outrageous without understanding the underlying balance of humor and heart that defined its predecessor. The jokes fall painfully short, relying on cheap, predictable lines that feel as if they were written by someone encountering the concept of comedy for the very first time in a dark alley. The slapstick moments that once burst forth naturally are now contrived, leaving you with more secondhand embarrassment than genuine laughter. Moreover, the absence of Carrey's magnetic performance leaves a void that no one else could have filled. Carrey wasn't just a comedian, he was the embodiment of Stanley Ipkiss's everyman wish to unleash his inner cartoon god. In Son of the Mask, Jamie Kennedy is tasked with inheriting that role, yet he struggles to capture even a fraction of Carrey's magic. The result is a character that feels bland and uninspired, a pale imitation of the original charm. Even the film's attempts at humor feel misplaced within the overall narrative. Moments that should be uproariously funny end up feeling off-tone and awkward, as if the filmmakers were ticking boxes rather than crafting a cohesive comedic experience. The humor seems like an afterthought, a series of disjointed gags that never coalesce into a truly entertaining whole. Reason number 4. Disconnected plot and pacing. While The Mask thrived on its playful, unpredictable nature, Son of the Mask suffers from a plot that's as disjointed as it is uninspired. The screenplay is riddled with plot holes and loose ends that leave more questions than answers. There's no coherent story that builds towards a satisfying climax. Instead, the film is like a series of unrelated vignettes, each one trying desperately to emulate the original's wild energy but failing to connect with the rest of the narrative. The pacing is erratic from start to finish. At times, the movie drags with long stretches of exposition and awkward dialogue that do nothing to develop its characters or their motivations. Then, without warning, it shifts into a frenetic burst of jump scares and over-the-top sequences that never quite deliver on their promise of excitement. This uneven rhythm makes it hard for the audience to settle into the film's world, leaving you constantly on edge, but never in a good way. A key problem lies in how the film handles its central premise. Instead of exploring the transformative power of the mask in a thoughtful or even entertaining manner, the story rushes through moments that could have been rich with tension and humor. The narrative feels like it's been hurriedly assembled, a mishmash of ideas thrown together to form a plot that's neither compelling nor logical. Important themes, like the nature of identity and the price of unchecked power, are only superficially touched upon, leaving the film feeling hollow. Reason number 5. Inconsistent characterization. In The Mask, Stanley Ipkiss is a character we instantly love, even as he transforms into a manic, cartoonish force of nature. His every gesture and quirky line feels deeply rooted in an identity that's both relatable and larger than life. Son of the Mask attempts to create a similar dynamic, but in place of introducing characters with their own memorable quirks, the film ends up with a cast of bland, inconsistent personalities that fail to resonate. The reboot introduces a new protagonist who's meant to inherit the magic and curse of the mask, yet he lacks the charm and vulnerability that made Stanley such an endearing figure. Instead, we're treated to a character who's defined solely by the absurdity of his situation. A man who inexplicably ends up with a child endowed with superpowers thanks to a bizarre sequence of events. There's no emotional depth, no backstory that makes you care about his struggles, and no distinctive personality traits that set him apart. Moreover, key supporting characters are equally underdeveloped. The attempts to build relationships among the new cast feels forced and superficial. In the original, the dynamic between the mask's wielder and those around him, whether it was his love interest or the offbeat supporting characters, provided a rich tapestry of humor and pathos. In the sequel, however, the new characters come off as mere plot devices, existing only to move the story along rather than to create a memorable ensemble dynamic. Jamie Kennedy's interpretation of the Mask character is hampered by poor writing and awkward direction. Kennedy's portrayal feels stilted and constrained, unable to break free from the cheap, CGI-laden effects that define the film's overall look. Reason number 6. Art direction and visual style, just off. The Mask dazzled audiences with its vibrant, hyper-real visuals that perfectly complemented Jim Carrey's manic performance. In stark contrast, Son of the Mask suffers from a visual identity crisis. The art direction is all over the place, coming across as garish, cheap, and downright unsettling. From the opening credits to the final overproduced set piece, the film's aesthetic feels forced. The color palette is overly saturated, and the design choices, from the set pieces to the costumes, struggle to evoke the same sense of fun and irreverence that made the original appealing. Instead of creating a cohesive, immersive world, the visuals clash with one another, leaving the audience distracted and, at times, downright nauseated. Furthermore, the overall production design seems mismatched with the narrative. While the original Mask had a consistent, if over-the-top, visual language that made every frame memorable, this sequel appears to be a hodgepodge of style choices that don't really work together. The result is a movie that feels like it was assembled from disparate pieces, a visual patchwork that fails to create a unified world. Reason number 7. Studio interference and misguided direction. A final, critical factor behind the catastrophic failure of Son of the Mask is the overwhelming studio interference and misdirected creative vision that plagued the production from start to finish. Rather than letting the film find its own voice, the project was molded by commercial pressures and misguided attempts to modernize a beloved property, a decision that ended up diluting the core essence of the original. From the script's inception, it was clear that the studio was more interested in cashing in on the legacy of the Mask than in telling a coherent, engaging story. This over-involvement resulted in constant rewrites and last-minute changes that stripped the film of any real personality. The direction wavers as the filmmakers struggle to balance a bizarre, off-the-wall premise with a desperate attempt to include fan service nods to satisfy nostalgic audiences. Instead of a bold, unified vision, what we get is a jumbled mess of conflicting ideas. The film that seems to have been directed by a committee rather than by a single inspired auteur. Key creative decisions, like the handling of the mask's transformative powers and the absurd premise of its inheritance, were muddled by an attempt to appeal to as broad an audience as possible. The resulting movie never commits to a tone, leaving viewers with an identity crisis that undermines both its humor and its horror. It's as if the project was handed over to a team of executives who prioritized marketability over storytelling, leading to a final product that is as generic as it is uninspired. Even Jamie Kennedy's performance, which might have been salvaged by a strong directorial vision, is lost in the chaos of indecision and inconsistent tone. The interference didn't just affect the script, it permeated every aspect of production, from the editing to the visual effects, resulting in a film that feels painfully overpolished yet utterly devoid of soul. In the end, The Son of the Mask isn't just a bad sequel, it's a failure on multiple levels, from its narrative and characters to its visual execution and directorial vision. It tried to be everything at once and ended up being nothing at all, and while some may argue that a reboot or sequel should reinvent itself, this one simply forgot what made The Mask a cultural phenomenon in the first place. But hey, that's just our opinion. What do you think? Do you find any redeeming qualities in Son of the Mask, or does it stand as a monument to everything that can go wrong in a sequel? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood's biggest missteps. This video is made by movie fans, for movie fans.